Hello, and welcome to the Dissidents Podcast, where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. On the eve of July 4th, co-authors Jennifer Richmond and Winkfield Twyman Jr. joined Equiano Project Head of Content Ada Akpala for an insightful conversation about Blackness and race and identity with noted podcaster Danielle Romero. Join us in our hunt for identity, not racial conformity. Welcome to the Dissidents Podcast. You have me, Jennifer Richmond, as your host, and Winkfield Twyman Jr. as our co-host. This podcast has been so long in coming. We have Danielle Romero with us today, and Wink is going to give us a little more detail on Danielle and get us started. And Danielle will give you the opportunity to give your own. Well, this is all going to be about your story, actually.
That's right. That's right.
Danielle has caught both of our attention, but Wink's first. As you know, who may follow us, Wink and I often are trying to find our cousins who across the color line have those conversations, see what it means to be American. And Danielle really just like epitomizes all this journey. She's part of this journey with us. She didn't know that maybe until today. So, that said, I'm going to let Wink kind of take the wheel. And Wink, if you'll just introduce how you found Danielle, why her story is so interesting, and then we'll get into Danielle's story.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jen. And once again, thank you very much, Danielle, for coming to speak with us here today. I think that this is our July 4th podcast. We'll probably air this and release it on July 4th. And one of the things that struck with me was a comment, a letter that Danielle had penned in recognition of July 4th, but back in 2020. And allow me to read a little bit from that. Not too much, but it's a nice framing for Danielle and her positive contribution to the world of race identity. Race is everything in America. Where would I land? I found that I, like my country, had a servile relationship to racial identity. I and we need desperately to be freed from it. And that was a post from Danielle, a letter called What to the African American is the 4th of July. It appeared in the Post, I believe, July 3rd, 2020. So now we're 5 years later to the day, and I think it's really nice that we have Danielle here to talk about those questions. She came to my attention because I have a great interest in this issue of race and identity, because I think that identity really, really, really should come down to one's sense of self, one's human dignity, one's individual position in life. And I think that one day the algorithm sent to me a podcast about Walter White. And here we now have our fourth member of this conversation. Welcome. Hey, welcome. Welcome, Ada. How you doing?
Thank you for having me. I do apologize, trying to get a 7-month-old.
No problem. And congratulations on the new one.
Thank you.
So I was just...
For our audience, we've got Ada Akpala with us, who is with the Equiano Project in the UK, and we will put our earlier podcast with Ada, Wink, and myself in our show notes. So Wink was giving us a little introduction of how he found Danielle and why her story has been so compelling to me. So sorry, carry on.
Sure. Thank you very much. And so I saw this video about Walter White that Danielle had put together, and it was gripping. I mean, I watched it from start to finish, and actually watched it, I think, 2 or 3 times, because it was one of the few occasions. It was just so good, Danielle. It was really at the cutting edge of how we think about race and identity. For those who may not know, Walter White was a Black man in Atlanta, Georgia, who lived in Atlanta in the 1890s and suffered through a race riot. But to the naked eye, did he appear Black? Allegedly, he was, I forget the percentages, maybe 5 over 64th Black. There was probably a few great Black ancestors in the past. But during those times, to simply have one ancestor made one Black under the law. And so, what I found so riveting about that video was how he recognized that in that social condition, uh, it didn't matter how he appeared. What mattered deeply was how the outside world defined Blackness. And so his sense of self as a Black man was cemented in that race riot. And so it was a wonderful exploration of the nuance and complexity of race and identity because he was blonde, he was blue eyed, he had straight hair. He was, I believe, the great grandson of President William Henry Harrison. I think he had his ancestors had come from Charles City County, Virginia. But he would eventually become, I think, the first or one of the first heads of the NAACP. He was known as a race man by the 1930s and 40s, and he used his race to investigate examples and allegations of lynchings throughout the South. Such courage, taking advantage of his physical appearance to subvert the system. And so I thought that was a wonderful story. More Americans need to be aware of it. So I could wax lyrical about Danielle, but let me begin to sum it up before we can talk to her about some of these ideas. You know, in my estimation, Danielle is one of the most courageous and truth-seeking voices in the YouTube and Patreon space today when it comes to racial identity. She grew up in Troy, New York, which is outside of Albany, New York. Her father was a proud son of immigrants from Italy via Ellis Allen. And those Italian ancestors came over between 1905 and 1923. If there are surprises or connections on your dad's side of the family, Danielle, just let us know, correct us. But on your mother's side of the family, there are some interesting tales to be told. Danielle was raised to believe her ancestors were French and Irish, but Danielle was curious, and her curiosity led Danielle to a different story about race and identity. So during this podcast, Jen, Ada, and I would love to explore three central questions, and we'll return to these questions throughout the conversation. One, Danielle, your origin story matters more now than ever. Why does your origin story matter more now than ever before in our nation's history? Two, why are you so passionate to find out who you are? And then three, why does it matter? And I love that we have Ada here because she can bring to us and to the discussion the British perspective on Blackness, identity, and race. She may decide that we're all just a bunch of foolish people trapped in a racial loop. But it's particularly important that she's here because it is our July 4th podcast, and she may have some thoughts on the pros and cons of that maybe misguided American Revolution a few 100 years ago. So with that, I give Danielle the floor, and I look forward to a wonderful exchange about these issues.
So I feel like I should have brought my tissues. I could. It's so nice of you. It's so nice because the internet is hard, and my personality is I am very sensitive, and I think that it's like the double-edged sword because I've had to learn to have thick skin to stay in the game, you know. And so, thank you. I really appreciate that. It really made my day.
Genuine words.
It really encouraged me. It was interesting when you were quoting from the Washington Post article. So I actually have that on my office wall. I have it framed. Okay. I don't want to like reach and get, but it's over there. And there's a really weird story about it, which maybe you had heard. So I had submitted this. Basically, I was telling the story of my fifth grandfather, one of them who had been enslaved, and he sued for his freedom and he won before the Emancipation Proclamation. It's like really just exciting. And I wanted to tell the world, I'm like, this is so cool. And so when I was talking to the editor at the Washington Post, they asked, well, can we call your great-grand Black on there? I'm like, well, that's a question. I don't know. Like, why do we have to? Do we have to like call her anything? And we had a little bit of a back and forth about it. And I was just like, well, I don't know how she identified. So if you want to, he's like, can we settle on woman of color? I'm like, okay. If you feel like you need to get into the weeds here, like you can do that. But he didn't tell me that it was going to be part of this grouping called what to the African American is the 4th of July.
Ah.
And something about that, when I saw it come out with under that heading, I immediately felt sick because I had been telling my friends, my family, I'm going to be in the Washington Post. I'm sharing this story. I'm so excited. And when I saw that, I thought, oh no, because it immediately, I felt like this, I don't identify that way. Or do I identify that way? Should I identify that way? Why are they assuming? Why didn't I get a heads up? Like, how do I send this to my family who doesn't know anything about this? And now I'm included in a group of African Americans reflecting on the 4th of July. And I thought, man, I wasn't really looking for the metaphor there, but there it is. Like, there I am trying to explore. And even in that exploration, they are like, well, you have to get put somewhere. So we're going to put you in there. And it was just really eye-opening because I feel like for so many Americans in particular, I don't know what it was like in Europe, but the desire to classify has been there for my family. And then even in this instance where it didn't affect me on a large level, the feeling of being classified without being asked for myself. Like, this guy could have asked me, like, how do you feel about it being included in this? I think he knew not to ask. And so I've wrestled with that because I had to, when I would send it to my friends, my family, I had to explain, say, oh, I didn't know it was going to be this. Don't think I was trying to be a thing I didn't, and that was like, that kind of really like broke it open for me. Where I'm like, this is something to either tuck down as hard as I can or really look at it. And
That's
ask.
a good point. That's a good point. How does that strike you, Ada, from the perspective of the UK, the idea that a major publication would just presume Danielle must be X as opposed to Y?
Just generally, I looked at Danielle's story and it's really fascinating. And my general thoughts about, the things that she's been through and the kind of backlash and comments that she gets. I was thinking about it today and it is actually really striking. During the time of sort of peak legalized racism, and actual white supremacy, I would say, and Black people were constantly being told, who they were, by white society, so to speak. Let's use these terminology, right? Who they were, who they weren't, their place, in society. So Black people's identity was controlled, was policed at every turn. And, of course, at that time, it meant very negative things to be Black, but that's a separate point. My main point is that they had sort of no freedom. And remember, at that time, I'm not talking about all these FBA stuff. I'm talking about enslaved Africans.
And that's foundational Black American, in case the audience wants to know, FBA.
Exactly, right. Yeah. I know these terms too, ADOS and stuff. I'm clued in a tiny little bit.
The news travels across the pond.
Yes. Oh, no, because I've had a lot of backlash from the FBA and ADOS guys. So that's how I'm very familiar with them, believe me.
Right.
So yes, when you were talking about the Africans coming over the Atlantic, names were changed, as generations sort of came and went, personal stories were perhaps diluted, right? So identity was diluted in that sense. And my main point is that we are now at a time when even in our own so-called communities, we sometimes see that this same policing happens amongst, ourselves, Black people. And I do say our for a reason. And I'll come to that in a tiny second. But yeah, who's Black enough, who's not Black enough, who has legitimacy, who has enough Blackness to speak on Black issues, and so on and so forth. And if you notice, it seems that people can't speak on Black issues only if they don't accept certain ideologies and accepted narratives about what it means to be so-called Black. Because as we've seen, there are some people who are not Black that can openly and freely speak on Black issues and Blackness, because why? They align with those accepted narratives about what it means to be Black and so-called white in society. So yeah, I think Danielle's experience is a real example of that. And it is painful because instead of creating this so-called, solidarity, these divisions and policing is being reinforced again, right? And it's almost like an oppression, right? But from people who are supposed to be your kins, right? And the reason I include why I say our is because at the height of the BLM madness, the message that was coming from the States especially was it's a global movement. A global solidarity needs to happen. It doesn't matter if you're not physically in this nation. If you're not white, you are like us, we are like you, we are the same. So voices were being invited from all over the world. But again, going back to my last point, as soon as you didn't agree with certain ideas, then you couldn't be part of this fold anymore. So it's this constant conflict between what I would sometimes call political identity, political blackness, and actual genuine identity, which each person sort of decides for themselves. So that's my just general opening thoughts on.
I love
the
that.
whole
I love
situation.
that a lot. Before you came on, Ada, we were having a light conversation about Danielle, and if I may share, Danielle, I hope it's not too out of school. But Danielle, I love Danielle's hair, and Danielle has very curly hair naturally. And I have to admit, I'm 63 years old. Danielle is the first white American I've ever known who relaxes their hair. So I've reached a Rubicon today. I've reached a milestone. I know, it's ridiculous, right?
Are you
But
serious?
I'm very serious.
I've been doing it since I was 18. I would travel
Wow.
across state lines
See,
to go get a good salon.
people need to hear that, because otherwise, little old me, I would just think, well, only Black women relax their hair. That's why it's so important for us to get out of these echo chambers. So thank you, Danielle, for opening up my universe.
I didn't. That's the first for me too. You're not
See?
alone. Yeah.
See? Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's kind of like though.
Jen, do you relax your hair? Just teasing.
We call it the Brazilian blowout, and it's like
Okay.
a straightening. I mean, I don't know if that was the same as
no, I
relaxing.
have done that, but that one you get wet and you're toast. Like this one, you can go outside. Those ones are good too. Yeah, it's a whole world.
You and I have laughed about questions of hair in our book, Letters in Black and White, and just, and one of our, I don't want to go too far down the hair thing, but, one of the things that our listeners might remember is when I did the DEI training in Austin, one of the questions on the privilege tests that we had to take was, I can easily find someone to do my hair. And if you could find someone to do your hair, you were highly privileged. And that necessarily meant that you were white. And I got stuck into this affinity group of other white people because I could find some people who could do my hair. So
Interesting.
anyways, hair.
But then we have, I don't know if you've seen these, if you're a social media fanatic like me, but, I see these videos sometimes of, two kinds of videos. So the first kind is, well, it's not fair that, or it's not right that white people don't know how to do so-called black hair. And then you see a viral video go around where a white person is doing black hair and doing it very well, and they also get backlash. So it's all these contradictions as well with all this stuff.
I think that, once again, one of the benefits of people getting out of our racial echo chambers, I really think that's so important. And that may be, Danielle, part of the reason why your origin story matters so much, is because it makes the discourse more intelligent, more informed. So I think that's important as well, a very important point. Why do you think your origin story matters so much in this particular moment in time in our national history? Because I think it does, but I want to hear from you kind of your thoughts. Why are people...
At first, I didn't think it did. I was surprised that it didn't, so I had to kind of think about that
right
myself. Because I didn't start out with a mission. I was just, my Grammy died. I wanted to go to Louisiana. And just, the snowball starts rolling and it's getting bigger and bigger. And you're like, well, I don't know what to do with all this. And I think part of it was the reaction to sharing that story online. It was really just supposed to be, I tried to do a good job with it, but I mean, we had never even had a camera before, we went down there. And to share it with extended family, some small research groups they were helping me kind of like, thank you, here's what I did with it. And, when it started taking off and the comments was I think it was just really shocking to see the, like, you're trying to be Black or you're embarrassed that you are Black, and kind of trying to navigate that
How'd
and
that make
realizing
you?
that was like,
How did
yeah.
that make you feel as someone who didn't identify as Black? How did that make you feel?
Well, it wasn't so surprising because I have been stopped by strangers my entire life. Like, people always ask me, they're like, "Are you Mexican? Are you Muslim?"
Ah,
Which is like a whole other
interesting.
question. Like, people
Right.
just assume like, "Are you this or that?" Um, which was part of the reason I really wanted to take the DNA test and find the family, because I didn't ever have an answer. I'm like, I know my dad. I don't know what's happening over here, you know.
Mhm.
And so, but it was interesting, and it made me want to, my degrees in history, and so it kind of was like, well, I don't know this part of American history. I don't
Ah,
remember learning about, like,
uh-huh.
what's Black, how do I even know
Right.
for Black, and kind of going down that rabbit hole. And so I think it really just started with trying to understand, like, well, how do I respond? Because I don't really even understand the term. Like, am I Black? Like, and I'm going through all of that and realizing, like, as Ada was saying before, like, there's a political side to this that I didn't understand,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and kind of going through that. So I
And
would say
and
it
to
started with that.
and to me, I don't think it should be political at all. I really see this as a matter of human dignity. That every human knows themselves better than anyone else on the planet. So it is presumptuous in the extreme for other people to impose on someone whatever their sense of self should be. To me, that's like a core tenet of human dignity. So when I hear you share these stories, I understand that reality, but it just seems so wrong, so needlessly political. Yeah, this is my thought. I think that we would be a healthier society if we allowed everyone, for whatever reason, define how they think of themselves and how they conceive of themselves. So, for example, in my own life, my deep dive into genealogy, I always wanted to know where the Twymans come from. It's an interesting family name. And I didn't know for the longest time until 10 years ago. So I can only go as far back as the earliest slave ancestor named Twyman. That was my great grandfather, Scott Twyman, born in 1839 in Virginia. And so when genetic genealogy came online, I discovered all these connections to Twymans who were white. And I discovered, lo and behold, I actually, in terms of DNA and bloodline, I wasn't just born of a slave ancestor in 1839. There was more to my paternal past, going all the way back to England, Birchington, Kent, England, Ada, which I would love to go to one day to see where the Twymans are and how they're doing out there. But it just changed my sense of self. And I thought it was it infused me with such humanity, such a sense of connection to the larger world. And that is what I think is the beauty of your work, Danielle, is that you inspire people to feel connected to the larger world. And that really, I think, is where the future of humanity lies, that connection to the larger world. What do you think about that?
I love that. I mean, that is really where my heart is at for this, because, like, I'm a Christian. I don't have to talk about it in every video, because I just kind of hope, like, the way Mr.
Sure.
Rogers did it, he did it without having to just say it all the time.
Right, right.
And I mean, I have no problem saying it too, but I do feel sad when I think about kind of the divide. I feel like it's worse than even when I was a kid in the 80s and 90s,
Yeah.
and I just hate the way that we're pitted against each other and how we accept it. And my kids and I always talk about this, but just how ridiculous it is to be like, it's okay to call people Black or white, but you can't say yellow anymore. You really can't say red. I'm like, oh, the yellows over there, or they
Sure.
started to try to say brown. I'm like, I don't know. I just like, what is this? And it's always in a sense of, I feel like, I'm trying to divide us as people and
Right.
to see each other differently. And I just have been shocked, at least in my own family, like how connected all of these people are and how connected we have been as a country for a really, really long time. This isn't new.
Now here's a deep question, Danielle, based upon some of your recent great work in your videos. Do you think the new Pope could do great good if he fully embraced and talked about his Black ancestry?
It's interesting. that I don't think he knew about any of the Creole stuff.
Are you serious?
Which is what I found. So what I have found is that his family kind of pulled what my family did, was during the time of the Great Migration, people are leaving the South because of Jim Crow. His family went to Chicago, mine went to New York, and they grew up, his brother said in an interview, the Pope's brother, that they grew up believing they were French and Italian, and they just had no clue about any of the Creole ancestry. And so I even feel like that would be really powerful to, like, in real time, be like, well, this is such an American story of just, you thought you had the whole story. You don't really, there's a reason why you don't.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, so I would love for him to explore it. I don't care if he wants to, however he identifies is, it doesn't matter. But just to know that is part of his story, I think would be really cool. I think it'd be really meaningful.
Well, consider that a shout out to the Vatican this morning. Please take note, Pope.
Can I just ask a quick question? Sorry,
yes,
can you hear
go right
me?
ahead.
Wink, was your question, do you think the Pope can do much good if he embraced that side of him? Was that your question?
Yes, that was my question. Yes.
Good for who?
Good
in
question.
In terms of what? What
this is how I would see the good. And it's philosophical, it's spiritual, it's divine, no pun intended. It's not so much concrete. But I think that people have such reverence on this planet for the Pope. He's seen as God's voice, God's agent. We haven't had someone for whom part of the Black story forms part of their essence. And so I think in some ways it would reinforce the idea of the brotherhood of man. Because not only are we all brothers and sisters under the skin, that's reflected in the heritage of God's voice on earth. So I think it would be a philosophical good. I think it would also, in a sense, help to reduce stereotypes, caricatures and stereotypes. Because as you know, Ada, so much of Blackness is laden with the negative, right? With the downtrodden labels, whatever. I think that having someone in that position proudly embrace that part of themselves would do something to lessen the weight, the baggage of Blackness going forward. That's my thought, but it's very abstract. It's very theoretical. It's very philosophical. Now, you may disagree, and I want to hear.
I do a tiny bit,
Go ahead.
but not just because I disagree, but because we have, of course, different experiences. And I know the American experience is very unique. And I'll give you one concrete example. I can, because, I have a mind, but I can't fully relate to the term the Black story, which is what you said.
Oh,
you said,
I love this.
You said, we've never had someone who's had the Black story as part of their essence. So then my question, which I know what can be said, but in my own personal opinion, I think the more we have people in prominent positions making the so-called Black story less of an importance, I think that is a quicker way and a better way and a more sustainable way, permanent way, to get rid of the stereotypes, rather than trying to, because it's happened and people fail on this. They try to fit into a Black story and it doesn't work, because whether you like it or not, and you've said this so many times, Wink, how many different types of Black people are there in America?
Right. That's right.
So they might have an overarching idea of a Black story, but it's so intricate, and then you can't please everyone. So why try to fit into that story in the first place? Have your own story. We are humans first, right? And that is the fundamental way we connect, in my opinion, right? So
yes. You know what? I love that opinion. I love that comment. Thanks for calling me out in a little bit of a sense. Jennifer, what's your take on this, on the Pope and how?
A little bit of a different take. I do think if he would have addressed his full history, the benefit would be very American. And so I'm narrowing it down, because much as what we're talking about, Danielle, with today is America is there's so much diversity, so much complexity, so much nuance. Our history is so mixed up, and Danielle's story of trying to find out, who she is and her ancestry. And, you and myself, you told your story already of your white Twymans. That I've done my search as well. And it just draws us closer to that idea that we're all human. But because Americans are so consumed with race and color and naming and categorizing each other, if he were to say, look, I'm all of this, I'm this and then some, that really would have been a true American story that we could have said, this is what America looks like. It looks like this messed up, mixed up, and it's okay. It's good.
But to Ada's point, America's just part of the global story, and I think that's part of her point.
I agree with you, Jennifer. I just think there is a way that Americans can be insulated in a way, and that's not necessarily a good or bad thing. That's just an observation. And from hundreds of conversations I've had with Americans, I can see that there's this kind of narrow vision of how they think the world is. And again, I really don't mean it in a bad way. I think
so true.
America has had that sort of global dominance in shaping stories, shaping culture. It's all come from that side. And the downside to that is that you're not very flexible in terms of, seeing that. Because like I said to Wink, I only disagree because I'm from a different perspective. I come from a different, life experience. But I have spoken to many Americans that they just can't accept that there is another perspective or way of life or way of, thinking. So that's why, from my own personal opinion, it's good from that side. I agree. But I think the less we focus on, because I get told off as well a lot, Wink, because I've, for example, I'm a big fan of things like the theory of racelessness and things like that.
Yes,
I really do believe.
Yes.
And but I come from a different angle. Not that I don't think, or I think we should be in fact racist, because actually that's a little bit boring for me. I do like, the stories and, where people come from and their back. I think that's fine. I just don't like the essentializing of it all. So I believe in racelessness in terms of, not allowing our race and identity to be the totality of who we are. But what was I saying? So I do think focusing less on these things. Sorry, I get told off because, I am trying to bring less of an importance on these things. But like you mentioned, we are in a time of identity politics. So I still find myself using white and black. And a lot of my supporters would say, stop using those terms. Let's get out of that frame. And I'm like, I know, but I can't use any other language at the moment. So, I think it's good and bad to highlight these things, but also not highlighting it at the same time. It's tricky.
Well, Danielle, as you share your story more and more, do you think you are helping to dissolve those racial American boxes, or do you think that you're causing the quote-unquote foundational Black Americans to become more and more race conscious because they feel a red line is being crossed when a white woman acknowledges in public Black ancestors? What's your take on that question?
It's interesting. I was trying to take notes on that. I was talking. I was just thinking. But one of the things that has struck me is that even though I don't identify as like white or Black. I'm like, if you really want to get to know me,
human.
I'm from New York. I'm like, that tells you more about who I am as a person. It's like I grew up in New York. That will tell you. But the idea that I think there is this Black story. I'm going to say in quotes because I think we need to talk about what it was like one standard deviation ago, like what was happening maybe for like my grandparents. Right. And for me, I didn't know anything about my family because of this experience. And so like the idea of like, well, there's this Black experience that was in the South, but then there's this other experience of the people who left, and being a part of the story without knowing I was a part of the story, being a part of the other side of the story, I think is helpful in situating kind of why did my family behave this way? Why does my family still behave the way they behave? There are things that get passed down in your family that they've kind of lost the meaning, but it's still passed down. And it's been really meaningful to me to be able to trace that. Like my family, is obsessed with sunscreen. Let me tell you, people do not go in the sun. Like you're always out of the sun. All my mom's aunts, her mom, like everybody's like, you're covered up. And that was because their mom taught them that. Like, don't go in the sun, you're going to get too dark.
Yeah.
Now I love sunscreen. I don't have any association with that because right now everybody's like, get tan, it's a great, but it's like, there's things that get passed down. And I love having the framework for the story of like, why does my family do this weird thing? And it's like, it's not because I'm Black, but it's like, there's a connection to how people reacted. And I love finding that. But as far as like making it worse, I mean, I think it's hard. I mean, there's a way of like look at like bird's eye view, but I'm much more like kind of cracking the sidewalk. Like I want to understand, well, here's all the laws, but here's how my family reacted to that. Maybe your family reacted a different way, and kind of just figuring out why are we the way we are? Because I think a lot of times we don't kind of sit and reflect at that. And I don't know. I think those conversations, even when people don't agree with me in the comments, I still think it's good because I don't think we're really allowed to talk about that. Like, I don't know. It's kind of like taboo to even for me to sit there and say, I'm just going to do it because it's your
family.
Like, you know what I mean?
It's your family. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like for me, my husband's always encouraged me. It's like, just tell the truth. All you have to do is tell the truth. If you tell the truth, you don't have to be worried. And sometimes the truth is, I don't know. My kids, I don't know.
Right.
So I think I feel like it's making it better. As far as the FBA stuff, I don't know if anybody wants to chime in on that first, but it's been interesting. I would say 99% of the people have been very supportive. I think it's just having another label feels problematic to me. Like,
And for our listeners, I believe FBA is shorthand for Financial Black Americans, and it's a label used to refer to descendants of American slavery, quote unquote.
But there's a caveat because the caveat is you have to also have been identifying as Black on public records for the last 10 years. I think that's been new almost.
Oh, really?
Like, because I am in the conversation. It's just not related, but like I went to a Christian private school for high school, real small. Right. I got my nose pierced. And it wasn't against the rules. And I got in trouble. And I was like, well, it was just a tiny little thing. And they were like, it's against the rules. I'm like, well, it's not. I looked. And so they had to retroactively rewrite the rule book. And then I had to take it out because it was in the updated rule book.
Right.
And it kind of feels like that a little bit where it's like the idea of like, well, it's descendants of slavery. It's like, oh, well, I'm descended from dozens of people who were enslaved.
Right.
But I'm not the right color. So they had to add this extra thing.
That is so messed up to me. That is just so messed up to me.
I'm like, so I don't think it's really about.
So where would Walter White fit in because of his appearance? Where would Mordecai Johnson fit in because of his appearance? Jean Toomer because of it. Just I don't like that. One of the things that really annoys me, Danielle, is when people play these skin color games with Blackness. And I appreciate Ada that I'm going back in time. I'm being pulled back into the pit, as it were. But in terms of the American perspective of these things, it annoys me when people have like a sliding scale for how they define Black identity. What is it? The blacker you are, the darker you are, the sweeter the juice, or something like that. The idea being that you're less Black as you approach how, say, Jen looks like. And to me, that's just ridiculous. In my own family, we had a range of skin colors. I can assure you, Danielle, no one at home cared. No one cared if dad was light and mom was brown or sister was lighter. It just didn't matter. And I sometimes wonder, why can't we in the outside world be as wise about skin color differences as we were in my family internally? Now, you may argue, well, you can't because the outside world is different and there's structural this, institutional that. Be that as it may, there is wisdom in how we live our lives in our homes, I think. And sometimes we don't think to take that wisdom to the outside world. And I think that's why Danielle and I sometimes come across as dissidents, an apt word for this podcast. And we come across as outliers because we really look at our family and our home and our inside conception of self first. And then we see how that has meaning in the outside world. Then we see how the context is provided by the outside world. I think many people, Danielle, when they talk about race in the public square, don't live very examined lives. I think they inherit certain norms and mores and customs and stories, and that's their script. There's not a lot of critical thinking. What is your thought
Yeah.
about that?
I would say that one of the most shocking, but one of the things I've shared that has been the most shocking to me personally and to the audience is Louisiana's black blood law was repealed in 1983. So that was the one drop rule. It was illegal. Right. I mean, they weren't supposed to have it because Plessy versus Ferguson had happened and established that, but then it got overturned by the Supreme Court, but it didn't matter. Louisiana was on their own trajectory. And the idea that 1983, you were still relegated, because people like to say, well, this was old. I'm like, the 80s, old to some of us, but not the people that are commenting. I'm like, you were alive in the 80s, you know? And at that point, you know, my great grandmother had died the year before. She never outlived the black blood law of Louisiana. This is on the books. And this is the law that's saying, well, you can't go to school with white kids. You can't, whatever. It's like someone like me, it's like, I have no chance, you know, I have no chance. And so it's been interesting for people, I think, to wrestle with the idea of like, well, if they see me and they're like, well, you know, you shouldn't be speaking on this, whatever. But it's like, if, you know, that's the idea we talked about in the video yesterday, the idea of presentism, this idea of like, we're only interpreting things through our lens from today. And we're not able to say, what was it like 20 years ago, 30 years ago?
Yeah.
And I just feel like that's really important. So for me, it's been really powerful to just say, well, how would my experience have been if my family had not left Louisiana and had not moved to New York? Like, what would that look like? You know, because a lot of people just don't know.
But don't you have the answer? But isn't the answer looking at your first, second, and third cousins who remain in Louisiana? Maybe that's the answer, in a sense.
They I mean, they had a whole mess themselves. You know, I went down to see some of them. They're like, we don't know anything. Like, it's just, I think what has struck me, again, I love Ada's perspective of like, let's drop this. I agree. Like, let's drop this. But for me, so many of my living relatives still have baggage from this, and they have shared it with me, and it's emotional, and it's like sometimes for the first time they've never shared this story, you know, or whatever. And so to me, I love that connection of like, let's share the personal story and let that represent something bigger.
You have a cousin, is his name Chris Smith? Didn't he share a story which is pretty dramatic of that kind of social prejudice, social segregation? I think there was a distant cousin who refused to sell land, and he was subsequently murdered by agents of the. See, I've done my research, Danielle.
Yes, you did. That's a B-side. That's a deep cut. Yes, that was another cousin of ours too. But they were. I would probably say they had more native blood, but they had land down there, and the guy got shot in this porch. You know, and entrapment basically to get the land. And it's like there's stuff that my family remembers it. You know, they remember it down there, and will it be forgotten in a generation? Probably, right? But right now, I think just kind of recognizing that these labels that are nonsense to us right here, like, this is stupid. It's like it shaped so much in Louisiana.
I want to offer a deep thought about this because I do think there is an element of effects and trauma passed down through families. I tend to reject that because I very much believe in self-reliance and individual. But I'm going to look deeply for a moment. Compare my family, Black American family, that always knew the same plot of land in Virginia since the 1870s, if not the 1700s. Wow. And my wife's family, they were free Black slave owners in Charleston, South Carolina, 4 generations of them. So they were living well, Danielle. They were at the top of the free Black heap. But when Reconstruction ended, it was a new day. And so I remember they kept living with their dignity intact, and this did not sit well with the white powers that be. And one day there was a conflict between a white contractor and a Black ancestor. The Black ancestor refused to pay, I think, money for a contracting service, and the white contractor vowed to get even, and they did. They burnt the house down, the family house, in the middle of the night. Luckily, the family got out alive, but they fled right away to Brooklyn, New York. And that was around 1900. And so that's a story where there's a racial act of violence. And I think it colored how my wife's family over the generations had tended to view the larger world with perhaps suspicion. with ill will. Whereas my family has no such stories. Our only story is of Black enterprise, Black property acquisition, the Black church founded by the Black
Wow.
great-great-grandfather. So literally, when I go back home and go to Twyman Road, where I grew up, and everyone was a Twyman, right, Danielle? It's wonderful. It's like Mayberry, USA. But on Twyman Road, I can literally look across the railroad tracks and see my great-grandfather's White House when I was a little kid. So my quote-unquote Black American story was always one of warmth, comfort, legacy, tradition, enterprise, alien to my wife's Black American story. And so sometimes people don't appreciate that there are these different, because everyone's an individual, everyone has a family. Every family has a unique story. And my wife will always live mindful of those effects of trauma from long ago. I will always live mindful of, I think, the best in Black American experience, enterprise and church and family. But I think it's a deep point, is that I think for some Black Americans who have those more positive memories, they sometimes feel misaligned with those who can only cast and frame Blackness as oppression, nothing else matters, right? As subordination. So that's been one of my things, Danielle, is how do I reach rapprochement? Is that the French word? How do I reach an accord détente with other Black Americans who may have different racial stories? Jen, we talked about that in our book, I think, that idea that different families have different.
Yeah, and we talked about it a bit with Ada too in our last talk on how you have a very interesting experience at being a non-American and not of how we kind of get past this identity politics. I mean, I'd love your thoughts on it.
She probably views us as just deranged people in this little.
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. And that's, everything that Wink has just talked about there, that summarizes why there can't be a Black story. I understand it has its specific meaning, but perhaps we need to take things for what they are. If it needs a different terminology, let it have a different terminology, but maybe it cannot be a Black story, because like I said, then you're trying to now, it's not natural anymore. You are trying to force a story because actually there isn't really one when you think about it. And and that's why there's so much, guys, there's so much confusion. There's confusion everywhere, but in terms of the American Black experience, there is such an identity crisis, right? And that's why all these subgroups come out, because people are so hungry, and that's understandable, as I talked about before, that loss of identity, that theft of identity, some may say, and it's all understandable. But I think we have to get to a point that we can't allow history to define how we should relate to each other today. And I have personally had experiences like yours, Wink, in terms of people saying I can't speak on racism because apparently I haven't faced racism. And the reason they conclude I haven't faced racism is because I don't believe that racism is the biggest factor or the biggest hurdle that a Black person has to face here in the UK. I just don't. I came from a country where, as I've said to you guys before, and I probably say on every podcast now, was 99% Black, and you would think it was a harmonious, lovely
Nirvana,
feeling,
utopia.
It really wasn't, there was tribalism. So just because I come here and the tribalism has a color to it, I'm meant to think it's so different and so beastly that I had to face these issues in my country, and I will face these same issues here again, just with a different spin or a different color. So I just think there is a human story. Like, for example, you mentioned, you grew up in affluent communities, and your wife, she had a lot of issues, or there's more negative background to that. But that's humanity. That which group hasn't? And just because Black people have perhaps had it worse, which can be arguable anyway, but let's for argument's sake, say that's the case. That doesn't mean that's a uniquely Black story in itself. Then if you don't fit into that or don't have that particular history, then you can't claim that identity. It's completely odd. We don't do that for any other identity. You mentioned delineation in skin colors. I actually think there's also delineation in political ideas that makes one more or less Black, right? And or struggle. And the Black identity, and it's here too, guys, it's here too. This idea that because you haven't struggled enough or you haven't been perceived to struggle enough, then you are not so-called Black, right? And it's completely foreign. So yeah, I had another point that was important for that, but maybe
that's
I'll come
such a
back
great
to
point, Ada. In fact, it just reminded me of something. Because I grew up in Virginia with long family ties, many Black and whites are related in Virginia if they're old American families from, say, the 1600s or the 1700s. It just makes sense. So my third cousin, Brenda, is a direct descendant of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. And I just think that's a great thing because she self-identifies as Black, but she embraces Thomas Jefferson on the eve of July 4th. That's a nice thing. And she embraces her mixed ancestry as a Black American. But here's the thing. When I was talking with Brenda initially, Brenda said she enjoyed talking with me because she felt there were no guardrails, that we had an open, honest, free-flowing conversation. There were no slogan words. There was no dogma to prohibit free expression. But she shared that she was starved for that kind of conversation because so often when she wants to talk about race, Black people will tell her, well, you don't look Black, so you can't really talk about it. You don't have my experience. And that really cut to her quick because she probably has one of the oldest, quote unquote, Black American stories as a descendant of Sally Hemings. But there's this ethos that, well, if you don't look the part, then you haven't had the experience to be able to talk about it, which is just, so it's almost like the flip side of Danielle's experience with the foundational Black Americans, except the difference is Danielle identifies as a human, let me get that straight, and Brenda identifies as a Black American. But if you were to see the two of them side by side, you guys look similar in terms of your physical appearance.
Well, I'm a descendant of Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson too, so maybe.
Are you really? Oh my God!
I joined
so we're related, probably,
in a DNA group. Yeah, I have a lot of family from Virginia. They left in 1806 after
funny.
Some of the laws changed. And they went to Louisiana. But there was like a DNA group, and someone was wanting my kit number because they were like curious, and it matched with all of them. I was like, "That's interesting." I haven't done any of the work; it's just the DNA.
Sure. So, but Danielle, isn't that a great example of how we're all connected?
It's crazy. It's totally crazy. But I really do love what Ada's saying because I think we have this problem. I almost feel like it's worse when people identify as white because I like to push on that too. Because I'm gonna say, okay, well, where's your family from now? Like, are you Irish? Are you English? Are you Italian?
Right.
It's like white's not a country. It's not a language. Right. It's not a food. You know, you didn't grow up white. Like you might be saying, oh, I grew up American with certain things. But my dad's family experience, you know, those Southern Italian immigrants is going to be very different than someone who has English American ancestry. Like we're so far apart on, but we're all American. And so I really do feel like we obfuscate and we lose the beautiful flavors of who we are when we say, oh, I'm white, I'm Black. Or it's like, well, okay, but what's the rest of it?
There's more. Right.
So, I mean, like in our house, like I was saying before, like, you know, we'll talk about, you know, Italian has always been most prevalent because of my dad. But, you know, the kids know, like, it's not white, it's Italian, it's Irish, and there's some French. And then they know, and there's Spanish. And it's like, I don't know. So I just, maybe that's making it worse, making it smaller. I don't know. But I like to just say, like, we're Americans, and here's the backstory. This is why we eat this, if you want to know. Like,
I like
you know
that.
what I mean? But I do feel like you lose so much by making these two big weird groups.
I love that. I love that. You know? Shin, does that resonate with you? That kind of pushing back on whiteness as a label?
I'm still struggling a little bit, and this goes back to our conversation on the Pope. I'm in agreement with you, but I'm struggling. So let me try to unpack that a little bit. I'm in agreement that, you know, the more that we like kind of hold on to these ideas of race, like I'm white, I'm black, whatever, the farther we are from having like this, kind of American identity, of which I'm very much in favor of. At the same time, because of the dialogue and the narrative in America specifically, I think seeing, in order to get over that, we have to see that in each other. So for example, this whole idea of genealogy and seeing, oh yeah, I've got a little bit of black in me, I've got a little bit of this in me. Same for Black Americans, saying I've got a little bit of white in me. Recognizing that, so that they can recognize and get out of those boxes that I'm not just black or white or whatever, is, I think, a necessary step for us to see the Americanness in the story. And so I think to get to that final kind of, if there is that utopia, which there isn't, but if there is that kind of kumbaya of we're all Americans, I think for America, we have to go through that genealogy step of saying we truly are. There is a piece of me that has Black history in it. There is a piece of me that has, Mexican American history in it, etc. For us to make that leap. I hope I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not, but that's my struggle. I don't think many Americans can just be like, let's just stop talking about race. Let's just get to this place where we're Americans. They have
Morgan
to.
Freeman.
I don't think we should stop talking about race, but like you mentioned, in a way, it's how we talk about it. But I definitely agree and think that these terms, white and black, is not serving us well. And I know you mentioned the importance of the American story, but maybe that's just a sacrifice that has to be made just to get a little bit of clarity in the situation. Because as we've just been spending 1 hour here, we've talked about different ways that we can classify and talk about Blackness. And that's why someone is Black today who is not Black tomorrow. And even they're confused. And there's so many things that has been mentioned. But I think someone mentioned, being able to like Thomas Jefferson or something. And
Thomas
that's like,
Jefferson, yes.
yeah, and that's what these terms do. Okay, I'm Black, so can I really appreciate this? Can I celebrate 4th of July? Am I being a hypocrite to my so-called Blackness? Whereas if you identify it with being maybe American, or if you want to identify as African, that's fine. But I just think these terms is what's actually causing a lot of the division and the American and the division. And going back to Danielle's point, because I spoke about this with a good friend of mine on her channel, because she mentioned, because I said exactly what I'm saying now, get rid of Blackness, get rid of this whole Black solidarity thing, nationally and worldwide, individual countries and globally. And she said, well, that's not right, because Asians and whites have a solidarity. I said, no, they absolutely do not. No, they absolutely. I'll tell you, in the UK, a Polish doesn't give a damn what the English are doing, and vice versa. The Pakistani doesn't care what the guy from. There is no solidarity, and the only group that wants to force this is Blackness and Black people. And it's so fragmented because it just cannot be. We have to connect. This word has come up so many times today. We have to connect on something more real than these terms. I'm not even talking about race. I'm talking about these terms that, remember, were apparently given to you, right? The Black terminology was what was given to you. And yet, you are the ones that you're not sure when you want to hold on to it as part of you and when you don't. So it's so multifaceted and complex. But
I just want to say, sorry, Wink, I don't want to interrupt you, but
ahead,
just
Danielle,
thinking,
please.
just like from like the historian perspective, something that was interesting for me is seeing that, I was like, the founding fathers used the term white in the Naturalization Act in 1790. And they said you could only be an American citizen if you were a free white man of good character. And they didn't specify what white man. And I've kind of wrestled with this on channel a little bit. Like, is it self-referential? They're assuming it's British. I would say yes, because Ben Franklin kind of did a whole diatribe against everybody else who wasn't Anglo.
Right.
Too. And so it's interesting, but I think what's hard for us as Americans is that we don't even know this ourselves. And we're like, why are we so obsessed? Why are we so obsessed? But culturally, this has been in our system for a long time. Even in the 1920s, people were trying to be seen as white by the Supreme Court, so they become citizens. Like, people were saying, I'm white, can I become a citizen? And it's like Justice Sutherland is the one who handled all those cases. And it was very messy. It made no sense. And then he finally was like, man on the street, if someone looks at you and I think you're white, you can become an American citizen. And so whiteness really has been tied to citizenship until 1923, 24, which is not that long ago, really. And it's like, I think a lot of us, I didn't even know that, you know, until I started looking. And it's like, it's going to be hard to get the claws out of this thing, because this is how you became an American. I mean, for a long time. And it's like, it's kind of, we inherited kind of a mess. You know what I mean? So I think we have to give ourselves grace to let it take time to get out of the system as well, because how long have these kind of conversations been happening? Not that long, really. And it hasn't been as easy to have a huge audience like this. Like, regular people like me can just sit on this couch and say stuff. I don't have to go on MSNBC. This is kind of new. So I'm hopeful, but I think it's going to take a little bit.
I think it will. I do think that we're beginning to see some positive changes on the horizon. I'll give three quick examples. So example number one, 20 years ago, Jen and I had not been able to platform my conversations with distant cousins of a different race. I wouldn't have had the tools. We wouldn't have had the knowledge. So I think that's positive. I mean, there are people out there who will see me warmly embracing cousin Jimmy Twyman, or cousin Nathan Twyman, or cousin Mark Brown, or cousin Arwen Fleming. And they'll begin to get the idea, slowly but surely, cousinhood, fellowship, brotherhood is irrelevant when it comes to skin color. Thing number two, I think the new generation more and more are beginning to have relationships, friendships, date and marry across the color line. I think that when you have more and more mixed grandkids and children, you're just going to blur these lines, which is why I return to my earlier point. I think Danielle is the future as more and more people come together. My own family, my oldest is dating a woman who is half Puerto Rican, half white, to use that term advisedly, perhaps English or British. My younger son is dating a woman who is, I'll use the word European American, 100%. And then my daughter is dating someone who is 3/4 Jewish, 1/4 Black American. So that's in my own family. So imagine what the grandkids could look like, or the great grandkids could look like. So I think that shows us that we could be on a good trend going forward. That if you go back to 1920s, it's horrible and dystopian, but maybe the trend going into the next century might ultimately prove to be positive. At least in my family.
Agree.
At least in
I
my
agree.
family.
It's the same. I mean, I have 3 kids and they're all different colors. My son is way darker than me or anyone else. And we're like, you know how genes are weird, right? And my middle daughter is like, I've been asked if I was her nanny because she's so fair. Yes. And then my oldest child looks more like me. And like, I guess I didn't really think about like, well, we've got a lot in the pot there and you just never know what's going to get pulled out. And I'm like, this is amazing. Like, I love this. And I think it speaks to your point of just, things are changing a little bit.
They are.
And that's great.
And the haters, Danielle, the haters in the comments, they sense the change are coming and they don't like it. So that's why they give you the snarky remarks, because they know the changes are coming.
They know for it now.
But like Danielle said, because there's a history to it, that's why it's understandable. There's this fear that they're actually letting go. Obviously not consciously because they weren't alive at the time, but spiritually, psychologically, it's hard to let go of that story. I contradict myself. There is something there. So, but like I said to Jennifer, there just has to be a balance. You don't have to forget the story, but it cannot define you and control how you
You gave me goosebumps, Ada.
You know, so.
I agree.
The problem is, Ada, is you've seen this, and I think all of us have seen this, is Americans, for whatever reason, I know this is happening in the UK too, but we are obsessed with keeping it front and center. I mean, all the DEI initiatives, I mean, it's like, we want that lens. We won't, and I'm I'm very hopeful, Wink. I love what you were saying, particularly your point about like mixed relationships. I think maybe give us, and Danielle, you said just wait, so maybe give us
Just
20
wait.
years, and maybe it is just a waiting game. But in this moment, and it's kind of maybe even slowly dying out in this moment, but in the past 5 years, I mean, we just want that to be the everything of how of the American narrative. And I do see, I would say I'm positive too that I do see some people getting exhausted with it. Some people getting exhausted with kind of these formulaic conversations and really wanting to have these conversations. And so that exhaustion, I think, bodes well for us. But it still seems to be a very prominent thing in the American narrative is race. And until and when we keep on pulling out this DEI and putting people in boxes, until we like let that go, that's not to say, again, like you were saying, it is not to say let go of history. Let's talk about the history. But I mean, to the extent that we are reliving it today, we're not moving past, we're not moving to a better future. That's what I'll say.
But don't be too hopeful, guys, because we're human beings. So once we stop caring about race, we're going to find something else. Before it was religion, before it was clans in the time of feudalism and stuff. That's just the human nature. So yeah, we'll stop talking about race, but believe me, it'll be something else. Maybe, hair color or
Ada, I wanna digress just a little bit, go off on a little tiny tangent. And as I look at my crystal ball, I see a different universe by the year 2030. And it's not just because of these wonderful conversations, not because of Danielle's wonderful path-breaking work, but AI, artificial intelligence. How will super intelligence by the year 2030 change our conception of tribalism and of humanity and of race? I wonder about that. Will we come together because we'll all recognize that we're in the same species bucket compared to this alien intelligence? What do you think about that?
I'll tell you, as a millennial, I hate to use like those terms too.
Oh, go ahead.
As a millennial, because not just broad sweeping, but for myself,
sure.
I have definitely seen in a lot of creative spaces a pushback of absolute disgust of AI touching anything. Absolute disgust. And my husband and I have just been talking about the renaissance we're seeing of people returning to old analog machines, hand done ways of doing things like that, and that pushback. And I do think that there is something beautiful about that, where it's like, for a second, we're not fighting amongst ourselves, but kind of thinking, how did we used to do this as a group? And I think that can kind of touch back even to what Ada is saying. It's like, we don't have to have the history front and center, but maybe even getting in touch with like, I'm learning how to make pasta and tamales right now by hand. Like, I want to do that. And just trying to slow ourselves down and just be like, okay, how can we get more in touch with that? And man, let me tell you, people my age are disgusted by it. Like, they hate it. And so who knows what will end up happening, but I do feel like you're saying, a different kind of divide getting drawn there that I welcome for sure.
But between people who use AI and those who don't, or
not
between AI and humans?
Just taking things and be like, did a person make this? Is this a person's story? Is this a person's perspective that is textured and messy and colorful? Or is this an AI creation that might look better, but it's superficial and doesn't have any depth? And I think that ties into knowing our history and things. You can't really create a beautiful thing like that unless you have that depth, unless you've done that work. And that's what I like. And people that we know, we've been talking about that too. So hopefully there'll be a little bit of a renaissance there.
I know. I think it's on the horizon. I think that's a good point. I mean, I look at some of this AI created art and I just think, actually I'm of two minds. Sometimes I just think this is creepy. I'm creeped out by this. It's too real. And then sometimes I'm seduced. I'm just kind of like hypnotized, because I'm thinking in particular of this AI generated like jazz music, and you have these, it's called retro rewind from the 1950s. So it's kind of like the future imagined from the 1950s. You just have these AI generated people acting in a very 1950s way. And I find myself just sort of lulled into senselessness, mindlessness. I hate to admit that, but I wonder if ultimately manipulation will be the final destination of many AI efforts. I don't know. But I do think that those who believe in dogma and slogan words will find that the times have passed them by the time we reach 2030. I just think you can't live in a 1903 racial world by 2030. Too much has changed. Too much technology has changed. There's too much intermarriage, too many mixed friendships and relationships. I just think I wrote an essay about that on Substack. It was called "The Souls of Black Folk," and I was actually in Fiji, and I was writing it because Ada, as you might appreciate, everyone on the island looks black in physical appearance, hair texture, skin color, and yet they have zero history that I have. And it was the oddest thing to be in a country where everyone looks like you, but zero of these people have your history, your family history. And it was just so I was like a little cultural anthropologist. I spent like the entire vacation writing essays about my observations on the meaning of race and blackness and how to. One of my favorite points, to tie it back to Danielle, my wife wanted to go swimming in the ocean. And my wife is Black American with curly black hair. And she went to the concierge desk and she said, "Do you have hair products for hair?" Because I guess her hair gets frizzy as she goes to the. And they said yes. And then she couldn't believe what they said. They were all black. And she said, "For my hair?" And they said yes. Now, from their perspective, this was like a non-issue. Everyone's black, so whatever hair things you use are going to work. But to her, living in 60% black San Diego, having gone to Yale undergrad, from a mostly white world, she always had to be conscious of hair products that did the job. And so I thought that was a very interesting thing, how even in a foreign country, blackness was relevant in terms of hair at the concierge desk. And I kind of wrote about that in my essay. So
it's interesting. I mean, I've seen people, because I talk about the Italian American experience a lot too on my channel,
right.
And people like me who have these like 2 generations removed go to Italy, realize they don't fit in at all. Nobody thinks they're Italian there. And like just the sense of like,
yeah.
I'm actually an American and I have more in common with people who I thought I didn't when I go back home. I think it's important to leave, because I've left the country and you realize, like I spent a couple weeks in Brazil before and like I looked like the people I was staying with.
Mm-hmm.
We did not. It was just not the same thing. It was fine. It was beautiful. It was different.
Yeah, right,
I couldn't wait to get home. I kissed the ground at the Atlanta airport. So I was like, I'm ready to be home amongst my people. Like, Americans are my people. And you feel that when you leave. So, I mean, I guess tell me that you haven't done it without telling me you haven't done it. If you haven't left the country, we can tell.
Right.
So
that's why a lot of immigrants have naturally ideas like mine, apart from ones who intentionally buy into the narrative because there's social and political power to it. But it's not natural, because once you've come from the outside, especially when your country was more homogenous, and you come into a country that isn't, and then all of a sudden something that wasn't a part of your existence literally is now the forefront of it. Right. So that's why naturally we think, how I think. But like I said, apart from those who find out, actually, you can get ahead by saying you're oppressed because of your skin color. We couldn't do that back in Nigeria, or
it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work.
They'll tell you to go and get a job, go do some work. What do you mean you're oppressed because of A, B, C, and D? Right? Only in the West this kind of talk happens.
That's so funny.
It's a bit of an aside, but when we're talking about like kind of the isolation of American and American narrative and whatnot, there is a statistic that only 13% of Americans are proficient in world history. We truly don't have an idea. 13%.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
And so we really do. It's bad.
Yeah, because once you're not proficient in that, history is tied into culture. How can you that's why a lot of them are, like I mentioned, insulated, because I can tell you, I was born in Nigeria, grew up there. You have to. I remember one assignment, and we literally got the World Book, and we had to memorize every country, every president,
Oh, wow.
every every capital. And back then, yeah, there's no cross, or it's stand up. What's the capital?
That's funny.
You don't know it.
That's funny.
So yeah, so that's interesting. I don't know why that is. Well, I think the first reason is because many of them obviously would, come to the Western world. But I think it is interesting that there is such a focus on learning about, actually maybe not history, more the Western world, America, the UK, and so on. So that is still quite interesting. I think we don't do it just to do it. There's actually a motive behind it. But in any case, it still helps, to be exposed to other stories and so on.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Danielle, do you think you would ever, if the opportunity arose, travel to Nigeria or the land of your African ancestors?
Maybe. My dad spent a lot of time in Kenya. Like as a kid, he would go for like a month or two at a time.
Wow.
So I always wanted to go to Nairobi just because my dad would bring me stuff back from Nairobi. But I mean, it's interesting. I feel like, I guess I would go check it out. But honestly, I feel like I don't even know enough about my own country. I haven't gone to see the redwoods in California. Like I feel like there's this like reframing of like, yeah, I want to go to Ireland. Yeah, I want to go to Italy. Oh, go to Africa. But like, I haven't even gone to see stuff here, and I don't know. It's interesting because like it's like cart before the horse almost. Like you know what I mean? But it's interesting. I don't know how that would go if I showed up. It's just like I'm home. Like here I'm in Nigeria with my 10%. But I know what's happened to people going to Italy, and they know you're not, So I think it's just going as a tourist, probably.
But here's the thing, and Ada can correct me or not on this. I suspect if I, as a American, traveled to Birchington, Kent, England, in search of the Twymans, that I would feel less of a sense of distance, less of a sense of alienation, because it's an English-speaking country, and because I would have the same surname. My race might be different, but I'm not sure that would matter that much. What is your sense if I were to go to Kent for a family reunion, Ada?
I think, I agree with you. There will be that kind of, especially you having the same surname. I think the only bit of alienation that will happen with these Brits is because you're American.
Exactly.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny.
That's it. Skin color, name, doesn't matter. But Yank is a Yank.
But you're a Yankee.
More as in a light-hearted way, of course.
A Yankee from Virginia. That's the thing. I know. When you go over there, you're the Yankee. I'm like, this man is that Southern guy.
And people don't understand that is the reason Meghan Markle was not liked here. It was not the race thing. It was not the race thing. It was more the American divorced Hollywood thing.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Doesn't help.
But there's an example of an interracial couple, and they have interracial children. So, hopefully that's another sign of the trend changing in the right direction. Yeah.
And speaking of children, I know Danielle and Ada have theirs to take care, to tend to. So just thank you so much. This has been a conversation that went above and beyond anything I expected. Thank you. And for our listeners, we will actually put this out next week. We'll let everyone celebrate the 4th of July.
Okay. Okay.
And then they can think deep thoughts next week on America.
Right. So allow me, Jen, to give my concluding paragraph in honor of this great podcast. It's been a lot of fun. It's been a treat. So, is the meaning of your origin story, Danielle, the pressure to assimilate and nothing more? I think that answer is too simplistic. A better answer can be found in Danielle's own words. And I quote, "What did America pass down to us? And what do we do with it now? Join me for historical deep dives, cultural archaeology, and family stories that challenge what we thought we knew. A good story doesn't just reveal the past, it reminds us how deeply connected we really are. And I think we have shown how deeply connected we are today. So thank you again, Danielle,
Thank you
for a
so
wonderful
much.
conversation.
Thank you. You gave me a lot to think about. I took pages of notes. That's what I
All
do
right.
when I'm doing
All
so.
right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And I will put for our audience all of Danielle, your work, Ada, your work in the Equiano project, and also Wink, you've mentioned a couple of your own essays. So those
Substacks,
for our-
yeah. I'm
looking
thinking
in
of
our
Race
show.
Bores Me as the front and center one.
I love it.
Well,
Love
happy
it.
for happy 4th of July. Ada, yes, sorry.
Enjoy.
Thanks for letting us go.
All right,
Take
y'all.
It was nice to meet you.
It's good to
And
meet
you too,
everyone.
Danielle. See you guys.
Take care, guys.
Thank you for listening. Please consider donating to the Institute for Liberal Values, a 501c3 nonprofit organization at ilvalues.org. All donations go to support our continued programming to realize our mission to provide the skills and support required to build community where there has been division, to encourage free expression where there has been censorship, and to foster optimism where there is fear.